Welcome to the All About You podcast. My name is Sheila and I am your host. In this podcast, I invite people to tell their stories of their travels, hobbies and passions. These podcasts are also now available on my All About You YouTube channel. So if you have a story to tell, please contact me on allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com and let's tell your story. Welcome to the first podcast of 2023 and I wish you all a happy new year. And we are starting off this year with a great conversation. My guest is author David C. Robeline and he is an accidental author of crime featuring LGBTQ characters. So David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sheila.
David, let's just go right back to the beginning. When you were young, did you always want to be a writer?
I don't think that I ever necessarily wanted to be a writer of any description. I think English was the one thing in my academic career that I truly excelled at. Parents sent me to a Montessori school as a preschool, and I came out of the Montessori school, all knowledge of all my letters, and I was reading above my grade level when I entered grade school. I just never stopped. So basically all the way up to high school, by the time I came through high school and took the SAT tests, which is in the States the test for measuring aptitude for college, my verbal scores were off the charts and my math scores were deeply mediocre. So I've always been lopsided that way, more focused on words and writing and reading than on almost anything else. So yeah, and then when you're in that kind of position, then writing just becomes something you pick up because you like words. I had a tremendously good English teacher in middle school, and Faye Moskowitz, and she's just passed away recently, and she was just tremendously good. Every week she would give us on Monday a list of 30 new words that we had to, over the course of the week, it was like an ongoing homework assignment. We had to look up the definitions and learn them. And then on Thursday, we had to turn in some kind of essay or story that used all the words properly. And which is very challenging because the words weren't necessarily collected into anything like, they wouldn't necessarily go together naturally. So you had to use a lot of creativity to come up with some kind of storyline that was going to enable you to use these words correctly. Otherwise, it was going to be... So the one thing, the story that got my family's attention was one that I wrote. To use all the words correctly, I had to write a story about a football game, but I had to write it from the perspective of the football. So the main character of the story was the football. And the whole game was told from the football's perspective. And that was the only way I could make all the words work. And that got us. My English teacher read that story to a bunch of parents, actually. That's during one of the parent-teacher meetings or whatever. And that was the thing that kind of woke my parents up to the fact that I was a pretty creative writer.
So it was in the stars then that at some point you would go on to be a journalist.
Both my parents had careers that were based in journalism. That's right.
So you were going to be funneled into that direction with your creativity and obviously the background of your parents. You worked as a journalist. How did you then go from being a journalist to actually a published author?
Well, right now, I'm sad to say, but journalism in the United States, at least, is a somewhat dying field. It's not a great secret that most of the big papers have huge layoffs of staff. So I was coming up to a time when I was looking at moving on from journalism anyway. My husband, Richard, had been a longtime reader of mystery fiction, LGBTQ mystery fiction, through Kindles. And he had been after me for a long time to try writing one of these types of stories myself, because he said, I'm reading these things, I know you could write them, you should give it a try. And I never did until finally the pandemic came along, I had more time on my hands. I was inside anyway, and I decided I would give it a go and try to do it. And that's how I came about with the first novel, A Champion for Tinker Creek, was that I wrote it more or less to prove I could. Because it was, let's say, proof of concept. It was the proof of concept novel, sort of.
Let's talk about your very first book.
A Champion for Tinker Creek.
So let's talk about where the book is set, the story, and let's talk about the main character.
Okay, A Champion for Tinker Creek is set in a medium-sized U.S. city in the low country of Georgia. If you know the topography of the United States, the low country of Georgia is the part of coastal Georgia between Jacksonville, Florida, which is more or less the Florida-Georgia border, and the nearest big city is Savannah, Georgia, up the coast. And I put my fictional city called St. Michael's Harbor in between those two population centers. Not high altitude, marshy, ecologically important place. And Tinker Creek is the low-income, immigrant, blue-collar neighborhood of St. Michael's Harbor. It's the neighborhood that, in American terms, is usually would be described as on the other side of the tracks. And I set my book there because my main character, Lyle James, is a mechanic who owns his own garage in the neighborhood. And it was a garage that his father started, but couldn't keep going because his father was a veteran and had PTSD and more or less was an alcoholic and just couldn't make a go of it as a business. So the business was failing, and his father's younger brother stepped in and bought the business from him and put Lyle in charge to more or less keep it from going under. And that's how Lyle came to have the business. He later bought it from his uncle. And the story basically is that right at the point where the business is really taking off, they've just won their very first government contract. The city of St. Michael's Harbor has just contracted with Lyle James in his garage to do all the paint and body work for all the city's municipal vehicles. So all the police cars, fire engines, and this is a very big deal. This is the first municipal contract the business has ever earned. And that's important because that's a more or less guaranteed source of income. You know it's coming in all the time. Right at that point, there's been a collusion between wealthy and underhanded developers and some parts of the city government to try to take over Tinker Creek and turn it into expensive, high-value condos. Because Tinker Creek, while it's the underserved or the underprivileged part of the city, is also the part of the city that's, 1 block or 2 blocks back from the ocean. So even though it's not been developed as such, it actually theoretically is high-value real estate. And some folks are wanting to use something that the United States has called eminent domain to come and seize it, basically. Eminent domain is where the government can say, your house is right in the part where we want to put a new highway, and the new highway is such an important public work that you're going to sell us your house for the price that we set, and you have no say in the matter. There's going to be no negotiation. We're going to take the house and give you this money, and that's it. So Lyle, and with the help of my other main character, Manny, set out to fight this, to rally their community and prevent this from happening. And that's the core conflict in this story.
So what kind of a story is this?
It's not a murder mystery story. It is a suspenseful romance, because Manny and Lyle, they can't just step up to these wealthy developers and say, we're not going to do this. They push back, and there are attempts on people's lives. The romance is there because both Lyle and Manny have their own reasons for not really being with anybody, and they've got to overcome those in their relationship. The romance also starts early in the book as well. So as the struggle is going on against the developers, there's also a struggle going on between them about sorting out their relationship and figuring out what's important, those kinds of questions.
So the story has got many, many layers.
Yes.
Let's talk about your characters then. So the main character is Lyle and Manny. How do you create your characters? Are they based on people you know?
Lyle was definitely based on someone I know, a remarkable man, and he was also good with cars and that sort of blue-collar kind of way. Manny was because I used to be a reporter, so Manny is a reporter. Giving him that profession made sense. But he's not me because Manny's also Hispanic American. His father is an Anglo, but his mother is a Cuban refugee from the Peter Pan. All right, so when Castro came to power in Cuba, some of the folks put together what they called Operation Pedro Pan, which was a series of flights from Cuba to the United States, carrying Cuban children to get them away from the regime and the Castro regime. And Manny's mother was one of the Pedro Pan children. To be okay with you, I could read a paragraph that explains this really clearly. My mother's family belongs to one of those wealthier Cuban clans that fled Castro's revolution, then structured their entire lives around returning and reclaiming the past. That meant my childhood was athletics and that academic achievement mixed with grievance, paranoia, and conspiracy. And while passing years had muted some of those motifs, they still made the thought of actually living in my parents' house less appealing.
We've talked a little about the main characters, Lyle and Manny. What about the stories? How do you get the idea for your stories?
I'm not sure. They're percolating all the time. My husband and I are living in Valencia now, and we've only been here for a few days. And one of the things that's happened is that I managed yesterday, when we had somebody coming to do some work here in the new apartment, I managed to lock both myself and the technician that was coming to do the work out of the apartment. So after rescheduling the appointment with him and he left, I sat for a long time on the stairs in the lobby of the apartment waiting for my husband to come back because he had the key. And while I was sitting there, I was thinking, suppose something happened where for some reason someone came along and killed me right now, and just my body was left here on the stairs. What a great mystery this would make, because I'm not in the apartment. How did I get lured out of the apartment? Why wasn't I in the apartment? What happened? There's I don't know. It's you're always thinking. I'm always thinking events, current events, things happen in the news that I notice. So you were asked about writing earlier. I've been writing for a long time, and I just didn't recognize it as writing. One of the things my father used to be completely infuriated by was the fact that I would not, at times when he felt I should have been paying a lot of attention, I wasn't paying attention. And why don't you have the sense God gave a goose is one of the things that he would say a lot of times, actually. And it's because I was usually daydreaming, and I was like looking off into space, or I wasn't paying attention. But what I was doing, and only when I became an author, I realized what I was doing. What I have for my characters, where my characters start often is in dialogue. Because what I was actually doing when I was quote unquote daydreaming is I was writing in my mind, I was putting together dialogue and scenes where people are talking and what they're talking about and giving them voices. And these things later they come out in the novels. These bits of dialogue. Some of the dialogue that's actually in this book, in the Champion Chicken Creek, some of it's decades old. I thought about it when I was a kid.
So David, can you introduce us to book number 2?
Book number 2 is called Manny Porter and the Yuletide Murder. It is the second in the Tinker Creek series, but it is a standalone book. People don't have to have read the first one to enjoy the second one. Unlike the first book, it is more solidly a genre novel. It is more solidly a mystery. There's not any ambivalence about that in this book. In this book, essentially, Manny has a mentoree who's about 19 or so, named Tristan, and encouraged Tristan to take an internship at a local tech firm. And it's set in the holiday period. That's why it's the Yuletide murder. All the events of the book take place between Thanksgiving and more or less the few days after Christmas. So it's a very tight timeline on the book. And in that timeline, soon after Thanksgiving, after a holiday party that the tech firm has held, someone comes into the lab where Tristan's supervisor works at the tech firm and found him dead. And the suspicion falls on Tristan, and the book goes on from there. Can't say any more about it because I'll give it away.
Absolutely. So we've got 2 books so far. Have we got anything planned for the future?
There's a 3rd standalone novel with, again, the same main characters, called Manny Porter and the Lavender Wings. It's more of an historical novel than the first 2, in that the story is that Manny is interviewing and doing a profile of a woman who is turning 100 years old. She was a flyer in World War II, and the central part of the story is her remembrances about being a flyer and falling in love with another woman while she was a flyer, and all of that. The tension in that book comes from scheming family members who are trying to more or less take over her home and ease her into a nursing home situation because they want her property.
2 books are actually published and available now.
This 3rd novel is with the publisher.
In theory, when will the 3rd book be out? I mean, what is the timeline between when you started writing?
Yes, that's one of the things that I've learned a lot about. 6 to 9 months after the publisher accepts a novel and buys the publishing rights, and is when it actually will be available to readers. Publishing books has to be a labor of love, because I can't imagine anyone who actually does it not at some point thinking there has to be a better way to make money, because it is so detail oriented and so methodical. It's something that must be, like I said, a labor of love.
So can we talk about that labour of love? I mean, how do you write? Presumably, are you writing on a computer? Do you write longhand?
No, I don't write longhand. My handwriting has never been up to scratch. But I do write on the computer, and how I've written has changed. I didn't have any real idea of what I was doing when I wrote this book. And this book is that the manuscript, book 1, A Championship for Tinker Creek, the manuscript that I sold my publisher was 50,000 words longer. This book actually is now. My publisher's name is Bold Stroke Books, and one of the wonderful things they do for authors is, first of all, they don't consider their authors to be sort of one-offs. They want relationships to be with their authors over a long time. And one of the things they do is they provide their authors with seminars and videos about the craft of writing that you can learn more about how to do what you do. And one of the seminars was about the 3-act novel, which I had studied literature before as a reader. So the 3-act novel and the actual idea of that there is a 3-act novel and it has these definite stages in it, and was all new to me. But boy, it was so helpful, because Manny Porter and the Yuletide Murder is a 3-act novel. In the novel writing world, there are plotters and pantsers. Plotters are people like me who will do an outline of their book before they write it. To me, it's analogous to if you have many painters will do a line drawing of their painting before they actually paint it. That's what I do when I do the outline of the book before I actually write it. making the outline of the book is the slowest part of the process, because that's the part where the story is really being laid out, the bones of the story is. And the outline for Manny Porter was 25 pages long. I do a pretty detailed outline. Pantsers, they're called pantsers because they fly by the seat of their pants. I think they scorn people like me who plot. Their idea is that they're going to start writing a novel. They're not going to know where it's going to come out. It's going to be more or less as the story develops as they're writing it, which works for them. And I think it's great that it works for them. It terrifies me. I would be so worried about writing myself into a corner or something like that it helps me tell the story if I know where I'm going with it.
Do you sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write from 9:30 till 12:30, or do you say, I've got to do so many words or so many pages?
Okay, that's a great question, because once the plot is laid out, the outline is laid out, writing is a discipline. You have to do it every day. If you don't make yourself sit down and do it, it won't get done. So my rule is 3 hours, or usually between 1,500 and 2,000 words, and that's it. Either of those two things. If I'm hot and I go sit down and I crank out 2,000 words in an hour and a half, I'm done. If it's slow and I kick it and screaming for 3 hours and I get barely 500 words, then it's it. Because at each point I know that whatever comes after the 2,000th word is not going to be as good as the first 2,000 words. And anything that I pull out of myself at the 4th hour is not going to be worth. I'm going to have to come back and kill that the next day. That's the time to go have a comida, find a glass of wine somewhere, talk to Richard, do something else, clear the mind, and come back the next day.
Because it is very much, as you say, it's a discipline.
Right. It's definitely a discipline.
What have you learned about yourself, David, writing these books? That
I can write one.
Okay,
that was probably the single biggest thing. I've learned that I love writing books. I love writing these novels. I love these novels. I mean, they're my novels, so it sounds self-serving to say that, but I do love them. I love the characters. They're real to me. I love doing it. I can't think of doing. I don't think I would want to do anything else. And I'm not a good husband. I'm probably not a good friend. I'm probably not a good lot of the things when I'm writing the books, because when I'm here and when I'm in this world, from the point where I've started plotting to the point where it's written, I can be really worthless about a lot of other things, because I'm always here. I'm only halfway with you, halfway with him. I'm always in my mind thinking about the characters and having them. They take up space and energy in my life, and that leaves less space and energy for other people, which is not a great thing for them, for the other people. But I think it makes better characters.
So David, if I was to meet you in a bar and asked you what you do for a living, what would you answer?
I would say I am a novelist. I have a boast on these books, in my biography on the book, in these books, I have a boast that I'm going to write, that I plan to write 100 novels, and that's the truth.
I mean, that is quite a challenge you have set for yourself. The book process is a lengthy process.
The book process, from the point where you've written the book and sold it to your publisher, is a lengthy process. Manny Porter, from the point where I plotted it to the point where the manuscript was ready to send, was about 6 weeks. So it's not impossible to do 3 books a year.
I mean, that has astounded me that you say it's not impossible to do 3 books a year.
There's a place in the United States called the La Brea, in California, called the La Brea Tar Pits, and it's where hot gaseous mud boils up from below the ground, and it's these pools where they're always bubbling. That's kind of where my ideas are like. They're always bubbling up. They're always bouncing around. I haven't done it in a while because I've moved to Valencia, and moving your household across continents takes a lot of energy. But back at home, I used to keep a pad of paper at my bed because I would wake up with an idea and I would write, I'd write it down. Probably half the time those ideas are bunk, but half the time there's seeds of good stuff in there.
I was going to ask you actually, have you got lots of bits of paper with names, ideas, places, a half-written sentence?
I use a program called Pyrus Author, is a program I use for writing. And one of the cool things it does is it lets you have that in the program. You have a place where you can have all these snippets and ideas and questions. As a reporter, I love questions. Questions are great because they lead to novels. I think being a reporter, the most important thing to have as a reporter, your most important quality is curiosity. Why? Why did that happen? Why did you say that? Who was it who said that? That works for novels too.
So, having very recently moved from the States to Valencia here in Spain, do you think you're going to get lots of influence here from buildings, day-to-day events, people you meet?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I do. The elephant in the room right now is how that will play itself out in the books. I mean, I have this series here. It's set in the United States. I'm not sure how that translates into having a Valencia feel to it. I know there are people who set novels in Valencia. I know that this wonderful bookstore called Book Lovers here in Valencia carries some of those books, and I look forward to actually buying some. I love seeing how other authors do things. That's one of the things that intrigues me all the time. I don't know, of course I'm not going to copy them, but ideas are great, and ideas come from all kinds of places.
I guess this is the thing, isn't it? You are never off the clock because you're walking down the street, you see a building, you see a person, you overhear something, that could be an idea.
Yes, that's right, but it's on the clock, off the clock, makes it sound like it's work. Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, very, very, very famous U.S. wit and author, one of those things he said was that work is anything the body has to do. Play is anything a body doesn't have to do. I don't feel like I have to. I love writing novels. I don't feel like I have to write novels. So all the time that I'm walking down the street having these ideas and things, I don't consider myself on the clock because that sounds like I'm working, that I have to do it. No, I'm never on the clock.
I mean, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation about you writing your first book, setting the challenge for 100 books. So have you worked this out then? If you're doing 3 books a year and you want to do 100, has anyone done the maths? I haven't.
Well, I haven't either, but we'll see. If you don't shoot for the stars, I may not get 100 books, but so I get 80.
So David, one thing I'd like to ask you, do you have a target audience in mind when you're writing these books?
I can't say that I have a target audience in mind, and my publisher probably wishes I did because it would make selling the books maybe easier. Obviously, anybody who is okay with the fact that that gay and lesbian people exist in the world and that they have lives and they're complicated lives and they love each other and those, that is a big part of people. If you're not happy with that, you're not going to like these books. People who realize that the world, want a book that's going to talk about the world as it is, not as the world as it might be in a romantic way or overly stylized way. I'm thinking, about the romances with the historical romances, for example, that somehow for years have avoided ever having anybody of color in them, and all those kinds of things are ones. These books have people of color in them. These books have people who have disabilities in them. These books have people who are mean, kind, generous, nasty. It's more real life kinds of stories and people and characters than I think might be found in fiction generally.
So who do you think is your target reader? Do you have an age demographic?
I presume that my publisher does. They're the ones who bought the book, and they're the ones who are selling it. They haven't shared that with me, so I don't know. In my mind, it's like the world is so much different now than when I was coming up and coming out. I came out as gay in the early 1980s, and it was such a different world. And one of the things that's happened as time have gone on is that there are relatively few lesbian and gay bookshops anymore. There used to be very many of them because they were the only places you could go and find lesbian and gay titles. Now lesbian and gay titles are all over the place. I know the Bold Stroke books, their titles are carried Barnes & Noble and Amazon and all over the place. That wasn't the way it was then. So for me to say, for example, that I would hope that somebody, a young person who is wrestling with their sexuality or wondering about it, reading one of these books would be encouraged. But I'm also knowing that that's less likely to be the case nowadays. And I'm glad about that. That's something that's tremendous. I think that's wonderful. People who like mysteries will like these books. People who like mysteries that aren't Agatha Christie all tied up in bows at the end.
Not typical boy meets girl, they lived happily ever after.
Yes, boy meets boy, and they live happily ever after. But the happily ever after has footnotes to it, and and the happily ever after is an ongoing story, just like life is. People forget that love is a verb, and love is a decision. We decide every single day. We decide we're going to love whoever we're in love with.
David, just before we finish, if anybody is listening to this and are completely new to your books, as I am, what piece of advice would you give us?
You don't have to start at the beginning, but the beginning is still a good place to start.
Okay, so we don't have to read book one to enjoy book two.
No.
Okay, but it's a good place.
It is a good place to start. Book one is the book that's least like a genre book, but it's the one I think it's always going to have a place in my heart.
So let's talk about Bold Strokes book.
Bold Strokes Books is my publisher. They're based in upstate New York. Very famous woman who goes by one name, Radcliffe, founded the company. It started as a publisher primarily of lesbian fiction. There were no such books really, and they've recently being, I guess, within the last decade or so, branched out to cover more of the LGBTQ world, and tremendously good. That was interesting because when I started writing this book for Tinker Creek, one of my sort of guiding lines was that I would love for Bold Strokes to publish it, because I'd long admired what they did, which is that it's not just that they're publishing lesbian, gay, bisexual fiction. They're determined to make the books they publish are going to be quality books. They're going to be well edited. They're going to be well done, and that's having that standard made them very attractive to me. And so the Bold Strokes website has and a lot of publishers don't do this, but they actually have writer's guidelines. If you want to sell us a manuscript, here's what you should do in terms of what the manuscript should look like. How long should it be? Those kinds of questions. And I tried to write this to fit those guidelines. And it so happened that about the time I was coming to the end of this book, Bold Strokes announced that they were having a pitch-a-thon. And a pitch-a-thon, because it was during the COVID time, it was all on Zoom. A pitch-a-thon basically is when Radcliffe and a number of her editors are sitting in a room somewhere, and for the better part of 3 days, one after another, all they do is welcome authors to come and give them pitches, to come pitch their books or their ideas for books. And you got 3 minutes, 4 minutes, they got 3 minutes to ask questions if they had any. And then at the end of that, they would either say something like, well, let's get back to you, or whatever they would say. In my case, they said, please, when you finish the manuscript, please send it to us. And so I did. I finished it and sent it to them. And they got back, the automatic email came back that said more or less, thank you for your manuscript. We'll let you know in a number of weeks. I think it was almost 12. And they came back to me in 2 weeks and said they would buy the.
How did that feel for you then, when you got that email?
Amazing and surreal and delighted. I can't even. I was on cloud 9, but I was also I couldn't believe it. Somebody would. I mean, these people are not just family and friends who I love and love me, and I'm so happy that they read my book and they like it. But their family members are not going to say, "Oh, this is a terrible piece of book," whatever. And these are people who are professionals, and they read books all the time. And they said this was good. I was like, wow.
When was the first time you held your first book in your hand, a physical copy of the actual book? Where were you and how did that happen?
About a month before, or more than 6 weeks before the book actually goes on sale, they send you what are called the author's copies. It's in the contract, 12 copies. And this package arrived, and I'd forgotten they said they would send them, and I wasn't expecting it. And I was actually kind of irritated because I was on my way out the door to do something else, and the lady at the front desk of the building we lived in at the time said, "Oh, Mr. Morrison, you got a package here." I was like, "Oh, what the heck? What could it be? I don't want to deal with it now." And when I realized what it was, it just knocked everything else for the day off the agenda. I was so tickled about it and overwhelmed.
So did you go and celebrate?
Yes. I think it's a good look. They're all good books. Also, another thing that's interesting about Bold Strokes is that as part of your contract, when they sell you, the contract they use when they buy your book, you agree that your next book with LGBTQ characters in it, they get first dibs on it. That's what remembering that they're looking for an ongoing relationship with their authors. They're not looking for just a one-off. They want to, they're interested in me when I'm very early in my novel writing career. I know I've met their authors who've been with them for more than 20 years and who have tens and tens of books written. So I'm not the only one author out there churning out books aiming for 100. I may be the only one who says it, but I think there are other people who are doing it too. It's a tremendous company, and I love working with them. And right now, they've got my manuscript. They've got the one for Lavender Wings, and frankly, they're holding on to it. Haven't really made a decision about it yet because they want to see how these books do, how people buy them. So that brings us to the problem of marketing books, which is what I don't know very much about. But authors have to know about that now. There's so many books out there. The competition is so stiff. You are fighting for people's attention, people's eyeballs, and you have to. If you're an author and you believe in your product, you have to do that. I can't just be in an ivory tower somewhere writing these books because no one maybe will read them if I just don't get involved in marketing them.
We're sitting here with physical copies of your two books. Are they available as ebooks on
Oh yes, they're on Kindle, absolutely.
Okay, so we will put all the links to your website, to Amazon, and to the publishers, so everybody can see where the books are available.
Bless your heart, that's wonderful.
David, thank you so much for talking about the writing process of your books, the stories of the two physical books that are out there, and a little snippet of the third one that hopefully is going to be published. David, thank you so much for taking us into the world of Manny and Lyle.
Thank you for caring enough to ask the questions. This has been charming.
Thank you, David. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe on whatever platform you are using. It is free, and if you would like to tell your story, please contact me on allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com and let's tell your story.